Let's go back to 1997. The world was in the middle of the dance music boom, but most people in the US still thought of electronic music was either rave culture from Europe or underground club scenes in cities like Chicago, Detroit, or New York. Then, two French guys wearing masks dropped an album that changed the landscape forever. That album was Homework by Daft Punk. At first listen, Homework sounded raw and weird. It wasn't polished like pop records. It had some, gritty drum machines, funky warm bass lines, repetitive loops, and the sort of robotic coolness that felt futuristic but also oddly retro. Songs like Defunct and Around the World stood out. Minimal in structure but hypnotic. For many of the U.S., this was their first taste in what we now call French house, a subgenre that blended, filtered disco samples, house rhythms, and punk ethos of doing things your own way. Daft Punk weren't trying to chase trends. They made Homework mostly at home on cheap equipment, and that DIY spirit was part of its charm. The album was unapologetically electronic, but also really deeply funky. You could hear influences of Chicago house, Detroit techno, George Clinton, Kraftwerk, disco legends like Cerrone. But Daft Punk twisted it into something new, a sound that was both accessible and experimental. In the U.S., Homework didn't explode overnight. It slowly kind of crept into the cultural bloodstream. MTV played the music videos, especially the unforgettable, Michael Gondry direct, Around the World. Clubs and Chicago radio stations started spinning the tracks, and suddenly a whole generation of young listeners in America was being exposed to a new kind of house music, one that wasn't born in New York or Chicago, but in Paris. Now, what made Homework so influential was how it broke the rules. It proved that electronic music didn't have to be confined to the underground. You can make dance music that was just weird and funky and still have mass appeal, and opened the floodgates for a wave of French producers like Cassius, Stardust, and much more. More importantly, it laid the groundwork for the explosion of EDM in the 2000s and 2010s, with artists like Justice, deadmau5, Skrillex, Calvin Harris, and even, of course, Kanye West owes something to Homework. Kanye famously sampled Daft Punk's Stronger, bringing the robotic aesthetic straight into, mainstream hip-hop. And you can draw a straight line from Homework to the global EDM festival circuit. The idea that DJs could be rock stars, that dance music could, headline Coachella and sell out arenas. None of that could have seemed possible before Homework. In short, Daft Punk's Homework wasn't just an album, it was a shift in the culture. It introduced French house to the U.S., helped define what house could be, and reshape the future of EDM. And maybe most importantly, it reminded us that electronic music isn't just about machines, it's about soul, imagination, and with a little bit of rebellion. So if you haven't checked this album out, check it out, let me know what you think.